I found the readings this week to be interesting and ones that allowed for a more critical view of Strasberg and his interpretation of the Stanislavski method or method acting. What was interesting to me is, I guess, when you consider that influences and changes, even within artistic movements, they tend to change as the geographical location also changes. It shouldn't have been that great of a surprise that the Stanislavski method, developed in 19th century Russia, would then be viewed or interpreted differently from an American lens in the early 20th century. So I think it wasn't until the readings that it really kind of hit me as I understood that there was this major tension between whether or not Strasberg was staying true to the Stanislavski method or not, but this rather rigid sort of idea that it had to stay the same. Whether or not Stanislavski changed his views at the end of his life regarding his own system, I did think it was interesting that people wanted or expected that this older Russian style, given that time, they expected it to not change when it was placed in an entirely different context with different social, societal, cultural, and political norms. When, like I said, you do expect other artistic movements, or as you study other artistic movements, there is a bit of a difference whether you're looking at classical movements in one place versus another place, that there is a difference between them. It's still not a style that I would teach to young students to really engage in, really due to the nature of recalling those strong emotional moments. Although we live in an incredibly interconnected world that would suggest that we're far more connected emotionally to one another, I feel as though instead it leads to this oversharing of emotional memories and feelings that is detrimental to youth development because there is a lack of guidance and support when engaging with it. That it's constant kind of, as my students put it, trauma dumping all of the time, and no one really there to help kind of guide how to address, how to feel any of that. It's also not difficult or unusual to hear of course, shocking acts of violence being live streamed, visuals of conflict and war inundating teenagers all of the time in ways that generations before have never dealt with. And I think that lack of emotional regulation or guidance of how to engage and respond has made them more sensitive with less of ability to self regulate just because they're constantly just inundated with it all, which is already a potent combination when you consider that they're already in a time period in their life of continual change, trying to find themselves, questioning who they are. So, in terms of teaching, say, method acting or the Stanislavski method to them, there's a lot of hesitation that I personally place on it in terms of my students, given that I also know them. I'm sure if you were able to get to know your students really well, know their background really well, and know the support they have really well, you could make a different sort of judgment based on their age. And that, I think, knowing the students that I have and their circumstances, it's not something that I would necessarily engage with or consider. I do feel as though, despite not really engaging with teaching them to personally kind of use the system, I do think there's a merit to teaching them about the styles and how to understand it from its historical and cultural significance, and then being able to identify it today. The lesson plan that I developed, it also reflected that idea. It reflected that ability to do so. And I guess, okay, so the lesson plan I developed, like I said, reflected that ability to not just learn about the method and the different ways to approach it, but also the ideas of method acting being a form of rebellion that reflected American cultural identity in the mid 20th century, that I think in and of itself is incredibly important to consider as it grew. The Stanislavski method was in response to their own historical, their own cultural and societal needs, whereas the Strasberg method or method acting is going to develop in response to the American cultural identity at the exact same time. Thank you.